Good morning. It's News from the Roots on Mountain Stream TV. Today is Tuesday, April 9th, 2019, and I'm Avram Friedman. We have a guest with us this morning, Connie Jean Conklin. Thanks for coming, Connie Jean.
Thank you.
And we're going to be talking about an event that Seascat, an organization you started, is having at the Mad Batter in Sylva. And describe to us what Seascat is, please, and what this event is about.
Okay. Seascat stands for Supportive Environment for Adult Survivors of Child Abuse and Trauma. And it's April is Child Abuse Awareness Month, and we've linked in with all the ones that are working to prevent child abuse. We feel it's a good time to talk about what happens for those who survive child abuse. A lot of people think that when you turn 18, it's all over, and it's not. That's when it just begins. When you have to, you may have survived your childhood, you learn some very coping systems that work in a dysfunctional family. You get out into the real world, and those don't work anymore. And so at the Mad Batter, well, we've got two events. We're having a 10% night at El Patron. That's at the Walmart shopping center in Sylva.
Okay.
And then we're having a 10% night at the Mad Batter, and we're showing the movie Sybil.
Oh.
It wasn't my first choice.
Sybil had multiple personality disorder.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the old term. Yes. And in those days, that's the term they were using. If you haven't seen the one movie that is reported to be more true to it's dissociative disorders, multiple personality disorders. They're all different, but Trudy Chase's story is Voices Within. We tried to get and couldn't. It's supposed to be more true.
Okay.
But I don't see anything in Sybil that doesn't fit with what I know of dissociative disorders. That's the term these days, dissociative identity disorder. And that is one form, one result of child abuse, one possible result of child abuse. And so it's an appropriate thing for us to emphasize, because the inspiration for Seascat is someone who is a dissociative identity disorder. It was his idea. I used the pseudonym Andy. This is bookmark. Have a bookmark.
Thank you.
It's got my blog address on the other side. Anyways, I wrote a book about our years together. It was something he wanted me to do. And there's some writing in the book about him. It's not published yet. Part of it is because of my own issues. It's taken me this long to get. I'm still not organized. And he's also asked me not to put the pictures in, and the pictures tell the main part of the story. But he's got a dissociative identity disorder, which is what Sybil has, and it's displayed in the movie. In the movie Sybil.
Okay.
Anyhow, Trudy Chase's book also is When Rabbit Howls, if you ever get a chance to read it. It's supposed to be really good.
What is it again?
When Rabbit Howls. Rabbit's one of the alters.
Okay.
And
When Rabbit Howls.
howls. Mm-hmm.
Like a wolf howls.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me tell you a little bit about dissociative identity disorder then. It's caused by abuse that is extremely severe, unbelievably severe. A child would not survive if they went through it and were aware of it all. It's so they cope by a part of them taking the abuse, and the child itself, the majority of the person, the true identical, the 3D person, as I always think of it. I always say, anyways, it's that person goes like, I've had people say, you know, they knew something was happening, but they were off somewhere else. There's a lot of places and ways they could go somewhere else, but anyways, mentally, they leave.
And what type of abuse are we talking about? Are we talking about sexual abuse?
It could be, but it could be any kind that is severe.
Beatings or?
It could be.
Yeah.
If you trauma and is anything where you think your life is in danger and you have no control over the situation. And
this happens repeatedly.
Not necessarily. Now, see, with DID, it could happen. It could be a one-time thing, and that's one thing that's interesting. Is when I worked in the mental health field. I worked in the mental health field in Florida and in New Mexico. I talked, my office mate in Florida, her and I were trying to get trauma and abuse disorders, you know, accepted, and the diagnoses, which the United States has very limited diagnoses that truly talk about childhood abuse. They're in the DSM. The rest of the world has them, just not the United States. They're in the ICD, not the DSM. We have the DSM. Anyways, we're trying to get these diagnoses accepted, and every psychiatrist I talk to, everywhere I've been, they seem to think it is so rare they will never see one. And they know very little, if anything, about them. At least that was when I was working in the field. Now, I haven't worked in the field in over 25 years. But in those days, they all thought they were so rare. And it's when Andy was diagnosed, I had questioned his diagnosis. He'd been a part of the mental health system or some kind of system all of his life, since he was born. At first he was labeled mentally retarded because he didn't speak until he was 4, and then when he did speak, he spoke to others that nobody could see. And so then they named him childhood schizophrenia, and that was his diagnosis when I met him, was schizophrenia. But he carried these dolls around that were a part of his system, you know. He said people were telling him they were schizophrenic hallucinations, but they didn't fit. I knew they were representatives of alters that he carried around with him. Anyway, so when I questioned his diagnosis, they admitted him I don't think he was there for 12 hours. And they called me up the next day and said, somebody has to come and get him. We don't treat dissociative disorders. He's not a client here anymore. Just out in the cold after all, you know.
And did somebody come and get him?
Well, I did, yeah.
You did?
Yeah, and I spent
What if there was nobody? What would...
He'd have been discharged to the streets to deal with it himself.
You mean they'd put him in a car and drop him somewhere off, or just kick him out of the door of the hospital? Out the door. Yeah. And with nowhere to go?
Yeah, well, he had his own apartment. He lived in the community. Okay. You know, but he wouldn't have a support network at all. He was used to case managers taking him to the store, and, you know, so he kind of like was never taught daily living. He had a refrigerator full of milk because his case manager said, you need milk. But he didn't drink milk. It just filled it, he just put it in his refrigerator because they bought it when they took him to the store. You know, it's ridiculous. But a lot of people with dissociative disorders might have only had one incident of that kind of severe abuse. And so really people with dissociative disorders are quite common. It's just they don't always know that everybody doesn't have this, or an alter who feels safe. If a child can go home to a loving family, whether they talk about it or not, they have some hope for recovery. And if they're a dissociative disorder and they have an alter or two that feel safe, that find themselves in a safe environment, they might not ever surface until there's some kind of trauma. I had a friend, there used to be a website.
Well, I mean, some kind of trauma, I mean, how does he survive?
Well,
Where does he
the
get
alter,
food from? How does he pay his rent?
No, I'm talking about other dissociative disorders.
Okay.
If they've only got 1 or 2 incidences of abuse, 1 or 2 alter that they've got, they might find themselves in a situation where they're feeling safe and they're not threatened. They go home to a family. 80% of abuse is caused within the family by a parent or guardian, but sometimes it's not. And sometimes they can go home to a family that loves and cares about them. That alter is going to be, it's going to be there, present, watching for something to happen. But if nothing ever happens, they'll once they're sure they're feeling safe, they're just going to sit back there until some kind of trauma, someplace in the back of the mind, until some kind of trauma.
And so sometimes are people with this disorder, are they productive? I mean,
yes.
they have jobs.
Yes.
They earn an income.
A lot of time. They're more likely to have success than someone like, I've got complex PTSD, which is a whole nother thing. Mm-hmm. They're more likely to have success than I am if they've got few enough alters and they're in a safe place. If they're provided with a safe place, there's so much more they could do. But all right, let me tell you about one friend I had from the online site I used to be on. All right, she didn't know there were alters. She didn't know she had ever been abused, because she had a family that, loved and cared about her. The alters were safe. She grew up, she married, she raised a family, and then she was in a bad car accident. All
the stuff came out.
All of a sudden they came out. I don't think she had a lot. I think she only had like 5 or 6.
So was she abused by someone outside her family?
We never talked about that detail. But she felt safe somewhere along the way because they didn't need to come out. They only come out to protect. That's what they are. They're there to protect her and make sure nothing happens to her. So if everything's safe, they don't come out. She found herself with toys that she didn't remember getting, and then I've known of people who found sexy clothing in their closet. They'd been going out at night. They didn't know, didn't remember doing it. It's that gaps in time that's the signal. That's something's going on. When you lose a few hours, in Sybil, she lost. What'd she say, 3 years when her grandmother died, because that was such a traumatic event to her. So some alter took over, and herself, the true Sybil. Sometimes you don't know, but then sometimes you get people like Andy, well, you don't know who the true person always is, because it's always some alter. And I had gotten to know I could recognize him. That's why I say the pictures are so important to the book. And he doesn't want me to use them. He's afraid somebody will recognize him. Mm-hmm. But they tell the story, because I could look at him and know who I was talking to by the expressions and mannerisms.
So what does Seascat do?
Educate the community. That's, we started out when Andy and I first talked about this over 25 years ago. We talked about building a center where we could get a therapist and people could live. I actually did something like that when I worked at 45th Street Mental Health in West Palm Beach. I managed to stop the revolving door to inpatient with borderline personality disorders, which is the closest we have to a diagnosis in a DSM. Or they're using PTSD now, but they didn't in those days.
You're using all of these acronyms, and people out there don't know what they mean. And I don't either.
Okay.
So
all right, I can tell you a little bit about borderline. Borderlines in my day, back in the day when I worked in the field, and they were the ones that were most difficult to help. Okay, they would they would get a job, they would have an apartment, they would do good till things fell apart, they just didn't work, they'd lose the job. It would just, and they'd end up wanting to hurt themselves. I mean, sometimes they're that depressed, sometimes they're just reaching out for help is what it is. When they come in to we had a crisis center, which nobody has these days, but we had a crisis center. They could walk in the door, and they would say they want to kill themselves, and so they get admitted to inpatient. But as soon as they felt better, as soon as they were going, all right, somebody's wanting to help me, I feel okay, I can go out and get a job now. And they'd ask to be, they'd be ready to be discharged. And before a case manager in outpatient could get to them, they'd be out the door just to come back in a few months. And some people couldn't stand to work with them because they felt like there was nothing they could do about them. Well, I stopped the revolving door simply by getting our screening department and our inpatient units to wait for me to go and meet with the client. They'd keep them so that I could spend some time with them, and I'd convince them to stay, and I convinced our housing program to let them skip the first 2 levels, because they wouldn't stay. If you put them in a program that taught them how to brush their teeth, they would I don't need this, this is ridiculous, and they'd leave, but if we could skip them up into the top level where they had an apartment that was paid for by mental health, and they could stay there without having to go look for work right away. And
just a safe place.
Just a safe place to be, and then they could come and meet with me, and I had my office mate knew every one of my clients, I knew every one of hers, so if anything ever happened, we could cover for each other. And our clients had a structured routine. They knew if they were going to be there at this time when they were supposed to be, they would get seen, and they would get somebody spending time with them, helping them understand what's going on, and it worked. I mean, it got people to stop rushing into inpatient. It got them to stick around and get help. I mean, some people needed more. Some people, but at least they were getting something, even if they didn't have the correct diagnosis, because we never got anybody to give them the right diagnosis. But it's harder today. We don't have a system that works that way.
Not in Western North Carolina, anyway.
I don't think it's anywhere in the country really anymore, from what I've heard. But I had a different perspective than the professionals in the field today, because I haven't. With our education program, we have an education program we present to the community. We can present. I've had a few speaking engagements, but everyone in our organization is a survivor themselves, or second generation. That's because.
What do you mean second? You mean children of survivors?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they've seen enough of it, and it affects them. So we've had a rough time getting started. Plus it's something nobody wants to talk about. The only ones who want to talk about it are the people who are survivors and not getting help. And they're scared to talk about it because usually it results in negative repercussions.
What happens to people who don't get help? I mean, they.
Well.
I guess there's a spectrum of things that happen.
There's a whole spectrum of things that happen.
Do some people die?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Suicide is. I don't have the statistics on me, but there is now. I mean, a lot of things have changed since I was working in the field. Since I was trying to get help as a consumer myself, a lot of things have changed. We now have adverse childhood experiences. There's studies. There's if you get on YouTube, there are hundreds. The best one is an introductory one by Nadine Burke that talks about adverse childhood experiences and what the studies have uncovered. And then there's more, and it gets very technical. But they've actually proven that the brain changes, even DNA changes with trauma. A lot of things that people used to think, when I was trying to get help in the field, and a lot of people this worked for when I was working with people, was the cognitive, working on your thinking skills, changing your perception, and noting things and changing, instead of assuming this bad result, thinking, well, maybe it's this, so you change your thinking, okay, and then you feel better, everything's fine, and you learn from that. Well, they used to tell you that's all you had to do, and it's not. And now we've proven with ACEs, and this is something I love because it's really made me feel better. But it hasn't helped because nobody else in the community knows yet. But I understand. When a person gets triggered is they experience something today that causes them to react as they would as a child. It becomes part of the autonomic nervous system. It's not something you have control over, which they used to think you did, and that's what always got me in trouble. Is as when something negative happens, I react, and that's what I have the same difficulties in finding housing as a military veteran because of being triggered too easy. I can't live in housing for elderly and disabled. I've tried, it doesn't work. I guess that's where I probably ought to say
what doesn't work about it?
They don't understand why I get triggered and get upset over things. When I get a property, say I get a property manager in my face, because this is what they do. They'll be screeching about I put a potted plant in the wrong spot, and yelling at me like, I'm some kind of a criminal, and I just melt. I mean, I just fall apart and scream and cry, and I don't have control. I get control over that if I can get what works for me is an Ativan, but I've got valerian too now. It sometimes works if I catch it in time, but if it happens and I'm not prepared for it, I get myself kicked out because they don't understand why I'm falling apart over this.
So it's the structure, the rules, and the interactions.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody treats
basis,
me the way my mother did as a kid, or comes at me like my father who had a temper, I go to pieces and I can't function. And now I managed to get through with a master's degree and work in the mental health field, and I taught school before that, during which time my memories were blocked.
Because you were too busy.
Well,
because your mind was occupied elsewhere, basically.
Well, I didn't want to remember because remembering hurts.
I understand. But I mean, having that routine and that job helped you.
Oh yeah, if I had I had a job.
Yeah.
The longest I ever kept a full-time job was 5.5 years at 45th Street Mental Health, and a year in New Mexico as a psych counselor 3, because of my own mental health, But my memories were blocked until, since I've been here.
Well,
in Western North Carolina.
Is it a good thing that your memories were blocked?
Well, yeah, it's a good thing in that I was able to function. I had a lot of more difficulties than the average person. I was afraid to ask for help. I was afraid of a lot of things. I've always been afraid of a lot of things, but I didn't know why. And I was diagnosed bipolar, and it calmed me down to take a pill, but it didn't.
So I think what you're saying is that it really doesn't help to revisit the moments of trauma that led to your mental illness. even in the long run.
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends upon what they were and how it affected you. In Sybil's day, they made, and Sybil was before me. Okay, Sybil was in the 1930s, I think, when Sybil was. When it's an incident of severe abuse, like a dissociative disorder, like a dissociative identity, multiple personality disorder is the term that you're familiar with. If it's something like that and there's just a few severe incidences, it doesn't really help. Just providing safe place is what, knowing they're cared about, they're fine. But if it's someone like with me, I think it helped to know, because I was able to put it in perspective. But when I didn't have my memories, I had racing thoughts of suicide. I didn't know where they were coming from, and I never really tried very hard to commit suicide, but I was thinking about it.
So in that case, it does help to confront your past
and get it
and understand what has brought you to this moment today, and to overcome fear of that incident.
Yeah. Those fears are unnecessary. They're in your head, your heart and your body don't always know. And then if you've got somebody like Andy, who has Trudy Chase is supposedly the record holder. Well, he's got at least 10 times that many. They come out in clusters of when I didn't know when they come out, and they come out in clusters. And while I was little kids and babies, I could hold them and comfort them, and they'd feel safe and they'd grow up. But he had some very angry teenagers that threatened me, and I couldn't deal with myself at the time because I was trying to deal with him. And it was a blessing when we moved here to North Carolina, and I ended up getting a living job, and we didn't see each other for a long time, and then New Alters came out. He forgot who I was, and it was all right. But he has so many alters. I mean, he could take care of himself, but he can't. I can't imagine him ever keeping a job because he has so many, and they're not going to get along well enough to do that. They're getting along well enough now to function very well, as far as taking care of himself and the things he needs to do. But he's still got thousands of children of different ages as alters that he has to be taking care of and nurturing. He learned to nurture them himself. That was one of the first things we did when he and I were still together, was learn about dissociative identity disorder and different ways to structure his system, the whole system of alters, because there's thousands, tens of thousands. I think he still creates them sometimes. I mean, he's got to, because I don't know a lot of them now. I know certain ones, and they're still there. They're a part of him, but he's a conglomerate of different alters, where other people, like my friend online, I have a good friend here in the community that she's got enough alters that she really should be able to take time nurturing them and stay home with them, but she has to work because she's got an alter who comes out and when she sees a psychiatrist, that alter takes over and acts like everything's fine. It's just me.
So
she can't get disability.
If I understand what you're telling me, sometimes there again a spectrum of
big spectrum
of how alternate personalities manifest themselves. Sometimes it's just a complete shift from one personality to the other, and other times there's an awareness
that develops
in the person
that awareness,
that they have all of these alternates, and
that awareness is part of the recovery.
Okay.
And once once they're all aware of each other, then they can work together as
merge, yeah.
they can. Well, they don't. They sometimes, but a lot of them will merge. But a lot of times it's like a conglomerate. You know, a bunch of them come together to work together. That's what Andy's have done. The one that is Andy today, I know him because he's introduced himself and we've met, okay, and other altars within him from when he and I were together, they're still there, but they don't come out much because it would mess up the system. I mean, the system is working right now with this group that's in charge and goes by another name completely. That it would mess things up for some of the old altars that I knew to spend much time out. That's what you call it, when they're or fronting, when they're the front, and they're the ones you're talking to and seeing. Because he's got the awareness. The awareness is not a problem.
I mean, how
anymore.
prevalent is this in the world we live?
Prevalent?
How many people?
There's no way of really knowing. See, and there's some people. I met somebody one day. He had stopped when I had that thrift store in Bryson City. Somebody stopped by one day, and he was on foot, and he was going the direction I was about to leave. I was going in that direction. I said, "I'll give you a ride," and we started talking about what Seascat was. And he stopped, and he was still for a minute, and then he looked at me. He said, "Nobody else knows. I've been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. There's 3 of me, you know." And so we talked about him, and I gave him my number, you know. I gave him a ride to where he was going, you know. But he functions. He's got family, you know, some family. It's, you know, it just that most people don't know it.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean, there's how many people are walking around
We don't
community
know. I have
don't-
met homeless people
Yeah.
who are dissociative disorders because their system cannot function well enough to even get themselves into a shelter.
So like, how different is this than a person who would commonly be described as moody, you know, and is it possible that people who we describe as moody, or even within each of ourselves, that we almost, maybe all of us have, you know,
well, okay.
multiple personalities?
If you look at ACEs, they believe that it's like 72% of the population or some number like that has at least one ACE. That means one traumatic event in their lifetime, probably in their developmental years, you know. But it doesn't interfere with them functioning. I mean, it just causes them a little, maybe some anxiety sometimes, because something might remind them of it, or, you know, but it's not a big thing. So in that case, yeah, it affects a lot of people, almost everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
To one degree or another.
To one degree.
I mean, life is full of trauma.
Yeah.
For
well,
everybody.
trauma is when you totally feel helpless to save yourself.
Okay, so maybe
you
I'm using that word incorrectly.
Yeah. When you think you're going to die and you have no control over the situation, it's that severe.
But almost everybody who's alive experiences that at least once.
Experiences something not that traumatic, but traumatic. You know. Yeah.
I mean, I can think of times in my life when, now that I think back on it, I'm extremely lucky to have survived that situation. You know, and here I am.
Sometimes it makes a person stronger. I mean, you know, if you've never experienced anything, you're not going to be able to have any empathy, you know, for others, and it's. You know, I mean, I figure anybody I meet that has empathy and understanding of other people has had some things going on in their life, you know, that they've overcome in order to have that.
I mean, life is dangerous.
Yeah. When
it comes down to it. You know, we all travel around in these automobiles, and,
I know.
And 50,000 people a year die in automobile accidents, and many, many more than that suffer serious injuries. in which they could have died, but they didn't.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just one example.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many other.
Well, that's why with Seascat, we're just trying to educate the community on what's, you know, so when you see somebody struggling, you don't just, you know, ignore them, shrug them off, and, you know, there's things that can be done in the community to make it better. There are lots of things. I mean, a little more funding for shelter help. I mean, the way they're doing it now, you know, paying for motel rooms, that's expensive. We need a shelter. And it doesn't mean people are dangerous just because they're struggling, you know. And then it depends upon what the shelter is and where it is, because there's some shelters. I've only ever been in one shelter. I was always afraid, too afraid. I've always been
As
so
an
far
inhabitant or as a counselor?
No, as an inhabitant.
Okay.
I always worked outpatient. But yeah, no, the average shelter, like I went to the one in Waynesville, which is awesome. They didn't have, years ago, I used to shower at the open door when I was homeless, and I always was lucky to have a car.
Where's the open door?
It's in Waynesville.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's an awesome place. But that's all they had in those days was, you know, a place you could shower and get meals.
Okay.
But that's a lot when
That's
you have nothing,
yeah.
you know.
Sure.
And I tried to go to the new one, you know. You can go for meals even if you're not living there, I found out. And I went with a friend. I couldn't hardly stand to be in there long enough to eat because of the noise level in there. It's just, and everybody in there was happy and upbeat and all that, but it was just the chaos.
And maybe unfamiliarity for people who aren't go there for the first time.
It's not that I have a problem with sensory overload. Okay. I read about that. I wrote an article about it on my blog. The difference between a temper tantrum and sensory a meltdown caused by sensory overload. Because I've so often been accused of having a temper tantrum when I just couldn't take everything going on all at once, and I had to go somewhere. And I'm not a dissociative disorder, so I can't just escape as an alter would, you know, or as a part of the system of a dissociative disorder. I have complex PTSD. My abuse was less severe but more chronic, which is a whole different diagnosis. So, but actually I have more trouble functioning than someone who's a dissociative disorder. But I have to do something with what I know and what I've experienced, because otherwise I would hate everybody in the whole world and God, you know, for allowing it to happen.
And you are, to your great credit, you started an organization to help other people with similar problems.
And at first I thought it was only for people like Andy.
And so, what does Seascat stand for? What are those letters?
Supportive Environment for Adult Survivors of Child Abuse and Trauma.
Okay.
And it's
a nonprofit, 501c3?
We do not have our 501c3. Okay. We expect to get it soon.
Right.
We thought we were going to get it a couple of times. And we didn't, it didn't work.
Are there others working with you?
Yes, I do have two very reliable and very, they're determined themselves. My board members. I've just only got two, but I'd like to have a few more functional board members. It took me all these years because our board members were people who were not functional enough to be there to help me at all, and I was barely functional for a lot of the years that we've had Seascat, and so it's taken us this long to actually be doing anything. But my board member, Mark, his degree is in criminal justice. He studied a lot of sociology, and he can write the 501c3.
Okay.
And my other board member is involved with another nonprofit that provides grants in the healthcare field. And she says we should qualify for one of their grants.
So,
I've written small grants.
And you've gotten some financial support?
Well, no. We had one donation of $100, and it wasn't enough to open a bank account. I had a bank account in the very beginning, but it was my money, and then fees ate it up, and I wasn't going to put more money into fees, at the bank. So we've just kept a separate roster of our finances, and we were working sort of under the umbrella of another nonprofit for a while, and I asked them, I said, how much do we have to make before we have to be filing on this? Because, you call Raleigh, they tell you, ask your lawyer. They won't tell you. And we don't have a lawyer. We'd love a lawyer if anybody wants to donate some time. But Mark can do the 501c3 paperwork. And anyways, and what I was told was, don't worry, we've never made enough to have to file. So,
but so that's what these events are for, is to raise money
to try and raise
awareness.
some money, yeah.
At the Mad Batter on the 17th and El Patron, when is that?
The night before, on the 16th.
On the 16th, okay.
And we're going to be selling raffle tickets. We had a thrift store. We had a thrift store at Gateway Market for several years. And then we opened a thrift store in Bryson City, and it was awesome. Once things got set up, but there were just too many things that we just started making some money at it when the landlord decided that we had to use the propane heater and not the electric, after he'd been saying all summer long, don't worry, the electric heaters work. And then it was like, oh no, if you can't hook up the propane, you have to leave, just as winter got there. So he let us leave stuff there, and we still got a few things in there. But I'm paying storage for things. So now I'm just going to give those away in our raffle.
What are you raffling? Oh, in a raffle.
In a raffle at Mad Batter, yeah. And we have 2 things that we're going to auction off, but I haven't had any. I've had one person offer me $100 for a chandelier we've got, but nobody's offered anything for that sewing machine. We've got a vintage Singer sewing machine.
Treadle power?
No, it doesn't have the treadle. It's got the regular thing.
It's got a motor, okay.
Yeah, it does, and it works. Somebody came in and checked it out.
Yeah, somebody would have.
Yeah, and we just have to get it out of storage. We can't keep paying storage on it. So we have to get rid of some things because it's ridiculous to be paying storage, And I was living in the thrift store at the time, so I haven't had I've been sleeping at Sally's and organizing my stuff.
Sleeping at where?
My board members.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So,
Reverend Sarah Lee Hennett.
And now, do you have a place to live?
Mm-mm.
Where are you
I'm
living?
sleeping at Sally's, and still I can't afford rent, and I can't live in housing for elderly and disabled.
Do you get disability?
I get Social Security.
Disability, yeah.
And
Social Security.
I'm 66, yeah.
Okay.
It turned from disability to Social Security this year. And been looking for work. 15 years ago, well, more than 15 years now, vocational rehab told me I was too old and overeducated. They wouldn't help me. Now they're helping me, or trying to. But all they can really do is provide advice, and let me know where jobs are when they hear about them. And for a while there, I was looking so hard. I mean, I was spending all my time looking for work, and it was a waste of time. Physically, there's limits on what I can do, and nobody will give me a chance to go back as a professional. I need a part-time professional job of some kind, something that pays enough, because that full-time I don't know I can do. Has to be just the right job. So I'm kind of stuck in a bad place. I got a car, but it's not big enough to live out of. I'm going to try to trade it in somewhere if I could get some help with financing on something bigger that I can park where there's electric and, just pay for the electric.
A van of some kind.
Yeah, a van or an SUV. I've seen a few I'd like. They're about 5,000. Yeah. So, and this car I've got, a friend of mine paid for. I'm not supposed to say who because everybody will ask her for money. So it's, but if we've got receipts, Sally and I have both spent money and have receipts. So, we'll be, hopefully some of this we'll be able to reimburse ourselves and pay ahead on the one storage shed. We've got a lending library in that storage shed. We've got a lending library of helping books.
What's a lending library?
It's a bunch of books, helpful books that can provide people help, information. We don't have everything we'd like because we had to quit buying them, but we welcome donations of books. We had a donation can at City Lights but nobody ever put anything in it, so we took the donation can away.
People don't know what it is, maybe.
I had flyers, but anyways, it's, like I say, it's a subject nobody wants to talk about or think about.
Well, I think if people knew a little bit more about it, they would.
Speaking of knowing.
Yeah.
I have this is in the brochures that are being printed up. We don't have them ready yet. But we were hoping to get a few volunteers to go around and clipboards and ask these questions.
So would you like me to ask you these questions so you can answer them?
First, see if you can answer them.
If I can answer them?
Yeah. You're not average of the community. You know more than the community.
Okay.
In general.
Probably not much more, but okay, so the first question is, what are the different kinds of abuse?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the kinds of abuse that I can think of are, in childhood abuse, are sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal and mental abuse. Is there more?
Well, it depends upon how you split them up. Verbal or emotional abuse, you can put it that way as an area. There's a YouTube video by Psych2Go, Psych, the number 2, Go, where they talk about the 6 types of abuse. I just basically, you covered the main kinds. That's like I said, you can divide it up a little differently.
Yeah.
So go ahead and go to the next question.
Which kind is the hardest to recover from? Well, there's an overlap there, but I would imagine emotional abuse is the most difficult to recover from.
Yep, it is.
And that could be a result of sexual abuse or physical abuse as well.
Exactly. They all have some component of emotional abuse.
Yeah. And
emotional abuse can tear a person down to where it's harder to recover from. Mm-hmm.
And again, when I think of emotional abuse, I think of a situation in which, as a child, you're told that you're worthless, that you're stupid, that you'll never amount to anything in your life, and that sticks with you at a very, very deep level and is difficult to overcome. It gives you a sense of inadequacy that you may not even understand that you have, and therefore you don't venture into things that could lead to success.
Yes, exactly. A lot of people who just scrape by, that's where they are. Yeah. I was going to mention at some point, but this is a good place to put it in. There's a really good video I saw the other day, and I did not get that number written down somewhere. And I don't even, it was a new one I just seen, but it's about complex trauma, and it was a PhD doctor of some kind was speaking. and it was so good. I'm going to have links I'm going to hand out for anybody who wants them. But she was talking, she reminded us of if the abuse is starting when you're a very young child. Anybody who's taken any kind of psychology, especially developmental psychology, for, you know, like school teachers and stuff take, they teach you about very young children under 5 are very egocentric. When you're first born, you look out and you look around the world, and you are the very center of it. Okay, that's all you know when you're a very young child. As you grow older, and you start experiencing the world more, you realize there's a lot more than just you. You're not the center of it. Okay, but when you're a little kid, you are the center of the universe. So any negative things going on in your household, I mean, any yelling and screaming that's going on, whether it's aimed at you or not, any dysfunction in your household, all that negative, to you, you're
it's your fault.
It's your fault. And you can grow up, and I was one, mine started when I was 3, and my sister was born with a birth defect, but any child that's you know, still in that developmental, I'm the center of the universe, and everything, you grow up, if it keeps happening over those developmental years, you grow up believing that's the truth of who you are. You know, you're the bad person that caused all these horrible, you know, everything that's wrong in the world, you know?
Okay, does child abuse occur the same in all socioeconomic classes? Well, I imagine it does, but that perhaps it, of course, you know, my father used to say to me, he says, rich or poor, it's nice to have money. and so, even though traumatic impacts can occur in wealthy people, it's still more difficult if you don't have money, if you're poor, to deal with them later in life. You don't have all the resources that wealthier people do have to deal with them. So the answer to this question is yes, but
there's one area of abuse we both neglected. Neglect is a type of abuse, okay, but it's very different. It is affected by, I mean, it's predominantly lower socioeconomic. It's not always. Neglect can be the rich parents who are, you know, totally ignoring their kid, and you know, they're not getting any of the attention they need. That's neglect too, but it's predominant in the lower socioeconomic classes. When families having to live out of their car and the kids with them, you know, that's neglect.
Yeah.
Now, I know a survivor whose that was all she had, was the neglect part. A single mother who couldn't earn enough, but she had a neighborhood where everybody kind of helped down each other, and she had, you know, her mother loved her, she knew she was cared about, and even when she was, you know, ended up going hungry at times, you know, or having to, you know, rely on neighbors for handouts, she's a very successful person in her own way, you know, because she grew up with a lot of empathy, but it didn't, she's a successful person, you know, so it's different than that feeling of I can't do anything, you know, because she doesn't feel that way, she can do anything, and she's doing it.
I think that's the ultimate lesson that all people have to learn, is that you can do anything.
Yeah.
And that's, once you overcome
almost
the doubt of that, then
well, it does help to overcome it while you're young enough to actually have the health and the resources. Right, yeah. which is why we're here, because you know, it's, yeah.
That's true.
We can improve the productivity of everybody in the community. You don't have to, you know, feel like people are going to bring down what's going on. I mean, we're vital parts of the community as long as we're given, you know, yeah, an open door.
Number 4, do you know who is most likely to be the child abuser? Well, people who suffer from low self-esteem themselves, I think are the ones most likely to be child abusers. People who feel like they have to be above somebody else, and so use other people. I see the same dynamic among people who are racist. They have to put somebody below themselves in their own minds in order to function themselves in some way, or they believe they have to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what answer is being...
That's a good answer. The answer I was looking for is family. Parents or guardians. Or siblings. It can happen with siblings too. Oh, I watched a really good movie. Oh, what was the name of that? Anyways, I thought it was a really good movie. Well, it was a sibling who was the abuser.
So, number 5, what causes a child to be abused? Well, I don't think that you look at the victim as the cause. I mean, what causes a child to be abused is the people around them who, again, feel low self-esteem. And
what about a child is more likely to bring abuse?
What about a child?
Yeah, some children are abused more likely.
Okay, well, a child who perhaps has some type of physical disorder or mental disorder, somebody who's autistic or mildly autistic, someone who causes stress in their parents' lives, that is not usual.
Yep. Yeah, basically that's it. Birth defects is a very common cause, and that's what I'm always looking for in that. Because that's what it was with our family. My parents were good people. They weren't bad people. My dad had a temper. It ran in his family, but he would have controlled it. I think if the situation had been different, and my mother was a narcissist, but she wasn't, totally, I mean, I think she'd have been fine. What a narcissist does is if you make them look good, they're happy with you and you're treated well. Okay, if you make them look bad, that's another. Then you they can, what they're gonna do. But she wasn't. If there was no stress in the family, I think we'd have gotten by. But a birth defect and anything like that, we have another survivor that's close with me. He's autistic, developmentally disabled, and when he was a child, he couldn't walk, and he was in a wheelchair at some point. Well, stepfather threw him downstairs, and he can talk about child abuse. We can't talk about much of anything else, but he knows his mother was a survivor who really pulled that family, out of some really bad stuff, and but yeah, he just dumped the wheelchair and down the stairs.
That's awful.
Yeah.
What would you do if you knew of a situation of child abuse? Well, I would try to intervene in some way. I mean, either calling authorities or depending on the severity of the situation and the amount, what I felt was the potential for violence, I would approach the perpetrator and try to ask them what they're doing.
Yeah, you could do that. I think you could. A lot of people wouldn't be able to, but yeah, calling, if you just suspect things are going on, you're not seeing an incident,
Right.
you can call DSS, and just say, I want to report this anonymously.
Is that what you call DSS rather than the police?
If you think there's something about to happen, call the police.
Or 911?
Yeah, but if you just think there's things going on that aren't right and you haven't actually seen it, you're not, just nothing different about this moment than 10 minutes, than earlier, I would just call DSS
and that's a hard decision to make, to judge other people like that.
Right.
And when you call DSS on a family or somebody, you're really intervening and interfering with their lives, and they will sometimes be investigated. That actually happened to us, where when my daughter was about, 5 years old or less.
Yeah.
She said something to the daughter of another a friend of ours, or a person who I thought was our friend, and this other person didn't like what she said, and she called DSS on us, and they came in and investigated, and I felt terribly violated by that whole. So to make that decision to actually call, you have to be pretty certain, or you have to.
Well, yeah, it's hard to know. Hopefully, DSS can investigate without causing trauma to the whole family. But you never know.
But just that happening, even if they're the nicest, and they were polite, they really were not accusatory in any way, and they did a very good job in what they did. But nonetheless, I felt, wow, nothing like that had ever happened to us before, and they found, they found that it was nothing. That this person overreacted because of a previous trauma that did happen in her life.
Yeah.
She had an abusive husband, and she ran away with this child who had befriended us, and so she, as a result, was
looking for something.
Ultra sensitive and
yeah, we've had something like that happen. Yeah.
Anyway, so it's a very complicated issue.
It is, but it could save a child's life.
True.
So you don't know,
You don't know. It's a very difficult decision.
But people that have been abused often are. We're hyper vigilant anyways because we're looking for danger to begin with. But also, I remember someone from a meeting I used to go to who wouldn't let someone else come to the meeting because she was so sure that person was a child abuser. And it was like, where's she getting this from? But she had been abused, and anybody who doesn't look just like what she thinks they should look like must be a child abuser, and they can't come to the meeting, and I'm going, that's, anyways, but yeah.
Okay, number 7, do you know any survivors of child abuse? Really know. No, I know you. I'll have to think about that, but I think I probably do. Besides you, I mean, there's so many interactions that we have during the course of our lifetime on a daily basis, and very often you do come across people who say, wow, what's wrong with them, why are they so sensitive, why, why do they so easily triggered into anger or things like that, and in many cases I think you could probably trace it back to childhood abuse. So I get the answer to this question is probably yes, but on the other hand, you have to be really close to somebody before you start talking about these issues.
Oh yeah, I think the point of the question is, how aware are you I mean, if you don't know anybody who's ever had any kind of abuse, the chances are you've not had a chance to develop any empathy, and coming to one of our classes and setting up a group for a class, would be a good idea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you've gotten through all those questions. You scored pretty good. You could volunteer with us. We could put you to work. I know. Unfortunately, that's the case too with a lot of the people. A lot of the people who know enough about our organization and what we do and could fit in really good as help. They're doing stuff themselves,
Well, what I can do is do what we're doing now, is we can get this word out to other people and try to help spread the word and create public awareness about it.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things a survivor may struggle with when they become an adult and have to go out into the world? Well, just trusting other people, I think, is a big one. Understanding themselves and generating enough self-confidence to function and succeed in life.
Yeah, if you don't have
answer to
the self-confidence.
Yeah.
And they'll struggle with everything from housing to food to relationships. I mean, some people who've been divorced 20 times, they haven't learned, they haven't recovered a lot of times. That's why they can't keep relationships. They change jobs every few months. I know people who do that. I've known some people who do that and have to earn a living, and it's a real struggle.
So, in many ways, I probably, in some ways, experienced child abuse. Not even and certainly not to the degree that other people have. But I think maybe all people have, in one way or another, experienced child abuse, because almost all families that I know are dysfunctional in one way or another. But in my family, the people, my mother, my father, my sister were very outgoing people. I was the youngest child, and growing up in that household, I had to fight just to exist, in a sense, in a sense of developing a psychic space for myself within that power that was around me.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm describing this very well, but they were all very powerful, intellectually powerful people. And throughout my childhood, it was all I could do to get a word in edgewise at the dinner table.
That's some degree of neglect.
Well,
you think?
I don't know if it's yes.
They didn't.
The neglect in the sense that they didn't think to give me a turn to speak. But also it impacted my self-esteem and always it took me a lot to overcome, and I feel like I have been able to overcome it. To realize that I could think for myself and that I wasn't mentally deficient in some way, because growing up, that was a difficult thing for me. Was to learn how to speak up in company and feel like my word meant something as much as as anybody else that's around me. And it took me a long time. I mean, not until I was in college and maybe even after that did I fully overcome that, I think. And maybe in some ways I may still not have overcome. Although people know me now, say that he probably talks too much. But I think that in many ways people have to overcome all kinds of abuse and adversity.
Yeah, and if they haven't,
yeah,
they're not going to have the empathy to
yeah.
care about others, and that's what we're going to try to teach people.
Mm.
You know, my dad lived through the Depression, and he admitted he was going to create a depression for us so we could know what it was like. I mean, he was very, you know, and yeah, if you haven't experienced it, it's hard to understand it. But anyhow, that's our goal: educate the community, and I will say, you know, I mean, there's some awesome things about this community too. There really are.
This is a wonderful community.
Yeah, and
we're talking about Western
North Carolina, in general, yeah.
But I think specifically Sylva, Jackson County,
yeah,
this area.
Well, I used to be terrified of the police, and these guys got me over it here. They got to know me and didn't threaten me at all, and they talked to me, you know. Just want to make sure I'm okay. If I have, you know, I had a PTSD attack right there on the bridge when I didn't have a PTSD, you know, the
post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah. No, I was having to cross that narrow bridge, and I'm nervous along the traffic anyways.
Which bridge was
this? The one they're actually rebuilding now. They're going to rebuild that.
Okay, from Harrods to Dillsboro.
Yeah, and and somebody probably just wanting to say hello beeped their horn behind me, and I didn't see them in time. I screamed and I ducked, and I couldn't get out of I couldn't go anywhere because I had the railing there. So it took me a while to
walkway.
Yeah, and I was shaking and hiding, trying to hide on the narrow little sidewalk. And by the time I got to the other side of the street, I'd seen cops pull up over there, but I knew that I'm okay. I just had to calm down, you know. And I got over there, and one cop stayed, and he'd shoot everybody else away once he saw me getting close to getting to the other side. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I have complex PTSD, and somebody beeped their horn and startled me and scared me. And he says, oh, I know you. Don't you remember? I used to talk to you all the time when you used to walk at night. And I'm going, oh yeah. They remembered me, and he knew, he said, I just want to make sure you made it across and you're all right.
Just like Andy and Barney.
Yeah. It was nice. And so I'm not afraid of the police here. I am in other counties.
These are generally good people.
Yeah.
So, number 9 question is, do you know what ACEs refer to? And okay, this is the first question I do not have an answer for.
I did say it earlier.
Yeah, I know you did. But I didn't
Adverse childhood experiences, and you could use, for the S, you can say scale, studies, or so there's more than one.
So it's active?
Adverse.
Adverse childhood experiences. Okay.
Yeah, negative experiences in your childhood.
Okay.
Yep.
How long, this question number 10 and a final question, how long do you expect it to take to recover from child abuse? Well, some people never recover from child abuse.
Yeah. I imagine there's some people in the community who figure, well, you see a therapist for a little while and shouldn't you be fine? Or you take this pill, shouldn't you be fine? No, it can take a lifetime. And even people that function and do things, there's medical consequences that have showed up in the ACEs too. I've got the statistics somewhere, they're on flyers. I'll have those at Mad Batter. And probably at El Patron. The chance of suicide, we know, goes way up. But there's also, and you expect high blood pressure, but there's, respiratory problems, COPD. The likelihood of developing any disease goes way up with a higher ACE score. more trauma, more abuse. It's, you wouldn't expect that, but fibromyalgia, those kind of things are extremely common. I mean, that's most of the people.
You're saying that fibromyalgia is a result of emotional stress?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. For most people, it is. Just and things you never would think of. So.
Something, and I don't know if this is out of order here, but something my father always stressed with us is to take vitamins.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, there have been a lot of studies. I don't know if you know who Linus Pauling is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you? In the Linus Pauling Institute in Corvallis, Oregon.
No,
Linus
I don't know
Pauling
much
was a
about
Pulitzer Prize-winning scientist, and
that that's what I knew. I didn't know more.
And he did a lot of studies on the benefits of taking a vitamin. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that came out of his studies, I believe, and not only his but others, other studies that have been done, is that the B vitamins in particular strengthen the nervous system and help people to cope with many emotional problems, and it doesn't make problems go away, of course.
No, but it helps the body.
It helps the body cope with
Yeah.
it. And very often, people who are economically stressed can't afford vitamins and can't afford a diet that provides, or aren't aware of and don't practice a diet that provides the nutrients that you need. And I don't want this to divert from the basic message that you're giving, but I think
it's a part of it.
It's important for people to strengthen themselves in that way.
Just certain things deplete certain vitamins. I mean, stressors, that are affecting different parts of the body. I mean, like, all right, I take ashwagandha because it's supposed to help with, my C-reactive protein is high. Was one doctor I was seeing there, she was always telling me my C-reactive protein is way too high. It's sky high. That's dangerous. That's a result of stress. So I take ashwagandha for that. I used to never sleep. I was on different kinds of sleeping pills off and on for years and still not sleeping. I had to go cold turkey off of Ambien when they decided you can no longer take, this dose. You could only take like a quarter of that, not even a tenth of that dose that I was taking. And melatonin is a really good, and tryptophan, which is its precursor, they're really good for sleep, but they didn't work for me. I learned about L-theanine. L-theanine works for me, and it works for a lot of people. It works on that same part of the brain that affects sleep, which is a result of that hypervigilance where you're watching all the time. I couldn't sleep at night. I hid under the covers with a flashlight and a book, listening in case something happened, And it's anyhow. So you can learn about those things. And believe it or not, I better not say where I came from. Anyways, I got somebody who bought me some CBD oil, which they asked if I tried it, and I'm going, I can't afford it, And they got me some. It's been awesome, and I haven't been on it long enough to know what it's doing really yet, but there are things you got to try that aren't traditional.
Right. And it's different for different people.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's body and metabolism are different. But I can tell you a story. When I was about 25 years old, I was living in Berkeley, California, and I was one of the people who was managing a crisis center in West Berkeley, which is a very poor neighborhood. And it's kind of like in Berkeley, like the closer you get to the San Francisco Bay, the poorer it gets. And then as you travel up the hill, it gets richer and richer.
Okay.
And so we were right next to the bay,
Yeah.
to let you know where we were. And it was mostly people of color, Hispanic people, a lot of black people, some Native American people, and poor hippies.
Yeah.
And I was living in a communal household in West Berkeley, and we decided to start this crisis center for people who were really in crisis.
Yeah.
And I wasn't paid for this. This was all volunteer work, and we were poor as could be, and we weren't eating properly, and my body began to deteriorate. My health began to deteriorate, and I remember being in an extreme emotional stress, and to the point where it was hard for me to function even. And then one night, my body started to shake uncontrollably.
Yeah.
And it was like I was watching myself shake without, it was like I was somebody else watching myself, And the Black Panther Party in Berkeley had just opened up a free clinic in Oakland actually.
Yeah.
And I got myself, I walked there. It was several miles, and I had to walk to get there. And they had this white woman who had studied acupuncture, and she was very well known for her abilities in acupuncture. She studied in France, actually, and she performed some acupuncture on me, and she put me on a regimen of B vitamins. And I could tell you that in a matter of days, I went through a transformation in which the shakes went away, and I was back in control of myself.
Yeah.
And I would recommend that to anybody. That there has been scientific studies that show direct correlation between B vitamin deficiency and nervous system disorders.
Yeah.
And so, and that may not be the case for everybody, but if
no, I think that is commonly.
If you've been eating a diet that's been deficient in B vitamins, then B vitamins may well change your life.
Yeah, that's two of the things that I actually I could get by homeless without sleeping at Sally's or anything like that. But there's two things I'm concerned about. I use oxygen for sleep apnea, and I don't sleep without it. Then I can't think, then I can't do anything. And the other is I can't eat right. And people give me food. I mean, I had someone the other day give me a bunch of food, and I'm going, well, I can't have that. I'm diabetic. I can't have that. I have to watch my cholesterol. I can't have that. And it's like, because people, and you see this, all the soup kitchens, they do their best with what they get, okay? But it is cheap, to provide starches.
That's right.
Now, beans and rice are cheap, but they don't quite go there.
They don't have the total B complex, vitamin B12.
Well, if it's whole grain wheat, grains.
Right.
Okay, if it's whole grain, the whole thing, and it takes an hour or more to cook, but they're not going to do that. They're going to get some cheap pasta.
Well, there are some things that like B12, for instance, is very hard to come by in the vegetable
Yeah.
kingdom. You can't, you can find it in meat and fish, beef and fish and chicken, but the only vegetable source of that I know about is fermented soybean products. So in other words, like tempeh and miso soup is good.
Yeah, I love. Yeah, miso's a good idea.
But if you're vegetarian and you're not aware of that, you will suffer from a deficiency in B12.
I knew someone years ago who was a vegetarian because all they ate were apples. It was not healthy. I ate macrobiotic with a friend who'd had cancer, and sometimes, and so I get close to the macrobiotic, but I would have chicken and fish occasionally, because I could. It wasn't.
Well, we've somewhat gotten off of
we did.
the track here, and it's probably my fault, but
well, it does all relate. It does all relate.
Yeah.
And the important thing to get across is that if you have a group or can get a group together and have one of our classes, Sally and I can both teach it, and we go to churches and civic groups and places like that. I looked into the community, teaching it at the community college, and turns out I really don't know enough about what they're doing today, because I haven't been able to keep up with, what's happening today. But I can tell you more than the average person in the community knows.
yeah.
So it's definitely a start, So.
Connie, thanks for coming in today, and thanks for
Thank
what
you.
you're doing. And I wish you the best of luck, and if we can help in any way. So folks, remember, this will be on the 17th, which is what day of the week?
The 16th will be at El Patron, and the 17th will be at the Mad Batter. It's a Wednesday.
Tuesday at El Patron,
And
Tuesday
Wednesday.
evening. At what time?
5 to 9. We get 10%
At
of all
both
sales
places?
between 5 and 9 at El Patron. At Mad Batter, I'm not sure what time he's going to start the 10%. It might be when the movie starts. It might be it's 6 or 6:30, something like that. But
Is there a program at El Patron, or they're just collecting?
No,
money?
I will be selling raffle tickets though.
Okay.
And I'm selling raffle tickets now. If you know anybody who wants them, you do have to be there when the number's called, because we're going to let people choose from what we've got to get rid of, and we've got things. We've got the Norman Rockwell stamp collector book that's priced over $50, and you could win it with a raffle ticket, $1 raffle ticket. So we have, we don't have anything less than $1, or probably, unless somebody doesn't like some of the CDs we've got or something, But yeah, we've got everything we're giving away is worth more than $1. So, and we've got almost as many prizes as we do raffle tickets. So, if you're there to pick, if you're not there to pick it, you can call me up and come get what's left. But you're not going to have the choices.
And so El Patron, again, it's a Mexican restaurant that's adjacent to Walmart in Sylva. And the Mad Batter, as most people know, is on Main Street in Sylva.
Yeah. Mad Batter Food and Film.
Mad Batter Food and Film, right. That's exactly right. And it's a great restaurant as well, and they show free movies there sometimes, and this time it's going to be a movie.
If I can be there early enough I'll be selling raffle tickets earlier if I can. I'm going to try to. Depends upon how much help. I'm still looking for more volunteers too to help out that day, if nothing else. So
good deal, good cause, and if you can, go and help. And thank you, Connie, for being there and for all you're doing. Okay.